cognitive reality, we are thinking in terms of repertoire. So a speaker is a person who has linguistic means and who makes use of this linguistic means to communicate. And Garcia names this taking the internal view of the speaker's language use. And the objective of my talk today is to present you this very vivid discussion that we have in Europe and out of Europe and in the US. And also in Africa, we are discussing translanguaging. I will present some results from Asia. So this is really a big discussion. And one of the questions could be, what can translanguaging mean to Mexico and to your teaching practice? So here you can see a short outline. We will first think about translanguaging, then we will have a look at the terms, and we will think who can do it, and then we will go to translanguaging at school, and hopefully we'll have some discussion. Okay, so let's take some first steps. Imagine some friends suddenly turn up at your door, and they are very hungry. So what are you doing? And why are you doing it? So let's take just 5 seconds to think, what would we do? Oh yes, so maybe you would look what you have in your refrigerator and you would think what your friends could like, and then you will make a kind of combination. And you will make the best of the means you have in the moment. So you could do a kind of trends cooking. And this is really an example of Ophelia Garcia. You will cook with what you have, and you will cook what you and your guests like to eat. You will put everything together so that it fits and is easily digestible. In linguistic terms, we could say you will use your repertoire and you will act appropriately to the situation. And you will use all your resources. So you will just look what there is and take everything you have to manage the situation. And this is a kind of what we are doing in translanguaging also. Vogel and Garcia are writing this in 2017. Translanguaging is a theoretical lens that offers a different view of bilingualism and multilingualism. The theory posits that rather than possessing 2 or more autonomous language systems, as has been traditionally thought, bilinguals, multilinguals, and indeed all users of language select and deploy particular features from a unitary linguistic repertoire to make meaning and to negotiate particular communicative context. Translanguaging also represents an approach to language pedagogy that affirms and leverages students' diverse and dynamic language practices in teaching and learning. So what I want you to notice here is that we have 2 important components of translanguaging. So first, a kind of theoretical view ask what is in the head of the speaker. Do we really have 2 fields or 3 fields of languages? And I think you all know that from cognitive research, we don't have any proof that there could be the angle of English and the angle of Spanish and so on. But we have mostly areas that are working for phonetics or grammar or semantics and so on. And so this is one point. And the other point that is very important is the didactic use. So what are you doing in instruction and in education situations with translanguaging, and which possibilities does it offer? There is a very beautiful interview of Ophelia with François Grosjean. He's another, I'm sure you know him, very important researcher on multilingualism. And he asked, you're a strong defender of allowing bilingual students in school to use their entire language repertoire through translanguaging. Can you expand on this a bit? And Ophelia is answering, if we are truly interested in knowing what bilingual students know and what they can do with language, We must separate their ability to use certain forms of one language or another from their ability to use language. For example, in schools, students are asked to find the main idea of a text, to support an argument with text-based evidence, to infer, to make a convincing oral presentation, to work out a math problem. Especially emergent bilingual students may not be able to show that they can do these things if only allowed to use the language legitimized in school. I think this sentence may be very important for you as English teachers because you have these especially emergent bilinguals when you have your students that still have to learn the English language to to work, to discuss with you. Okay, Ophelia continues, only by drawing from their entire language repertoire will bilingual students be able to demonstrate what they know and especially what they can do with language. Being able to perform with language-specific features legitimized in schools is not the same as having general language ability or being knowledgeable of content. So what is here kind of hidden is her social justice idea. And this is the idea that language is not anymore an instrument to exclude some pupils from the discourse in the situation and to give advantages to other students who know the language already better, but to open the discourse in the classroom for everyone, whoever has to say something in whatever language. And this is a view of this approach to translanguaging. This opens the discourse for everyone because it gives much more possibilities to act in the classroom. What is new? Because we had already such ideas that sometimes we can say something in our first languages. But what Ophelia points out that there is an epistemological difference. So there is really a difference of perspective on how seeing bilinguals. And when you're coming from the traditional monolingual view, so you will come to thoughts like borrowing, code switching, language interference, and so on. Also, language context studies start with named languages as categories. So you're parting from kind of doubling a monolingual view. And then you will look if you have relations between these multiple monolingualisms, you could say. And she points out it is an external view of language. But translanguaging takes the internal perspective of speakers whose own mental grammar has been developed in social interaction with others. For these bilingual speakers, their language features are simply their own. Translanguaging is more than going across languages. It's going beyond named languages and taking the internal view of the speaker's language use. Well, we have here a short definition how we can understand translanguaging. Translanguaging is the act performed by bilinguals of assessing different linguistic features or various modes of what are described as autonomous languages in order to maximize communicative potential. So it has many faces. Translanguaging is a theory. It is an act performed by bilinguals, and it is a kind of a method in education settings. When I prepared this talk, I thought, what is translanguaging's potential in Mexico? And I think we maybe could speak about this in the discussion. Because translanguaging was, we will see this immediately, was developed in a bilingual zone in Wales. And then the idea of translanguaging passed to regions and nations with a lot of migration and with a lot of pupils who had to come to schools to learn the school medium, as for instance the US, with many Spanish-speaking migrants coming to the US. we could consider what is the situation in Mexico. There are many approaches on how translanguaging can support English instruction, English as a foreign language, or other foreign languages, German as a foreign language. There is a lot of discussion about translanguaging and migration, but I'm not so sure if migration in Mexico is a very important approach. What is certainly important, and this is going back to the origins of translanguaging, is the integration of indigenous languages in Mexico. Another important point is this, what I call double migration of children. I'm not sure if you have this very often in Mexico. This was very normal in the Italian migration in the last century, when children went with the parents into the new country, and then they stayed there 1 year and went 1 year to school, and then the family thought that the children would be better at home with the grandparents, so they returned to Italy, and then they stayed 2 years with the grandparents, and they returned to Germany again, and so forth. I'm curious to know if this is also with US and Mexican parents the case, or if there are other scenarios. But maybe for this moment, it's most important for English as a foreign language and for the discourse of indigenous languages. Looking from outside, we are always very impressed that Mexico has such a richness of indigenous languages, and you have more than, as I'm sure you know, you have more than 7 million speakers of these interesting and ancient languages. And these are 7.4% of the entire population. So when your 2 students came to Hildesheim, we asked them to make a talk about the indigenous languages in Mexico. And they were very surprised and said, okay, well, we can do this, but we really have to think a bit because we are not indigenous language speakers. And they told us that they have never heard of anyone at school speaking an indigenous language, and that they thought this would be strange. You cannot do this so easily. So this was a very single statement, but I would be very interested to hear if this is really the case. We found this language is so fascinating. And translanguaging, for instance, could be a possibility to integrate these fascinating languages and to evaluate these languages in the instruction. Okay, so what are the origins of translanguaging? There are many origins, I think. And I think they are maybe much older than here, this origin that we normally think is the starting point. But the word is coming from the situation of the instruction in Wales, in Great Britain, and Europe. And in the 1990s, there was a teacher, St. Williams, and he noticed that his students spoke the language of Wales. You can see this here in red, mostly at home. And so it was difficult for them to follow the instruction in English. They could not participate and they were very silent. This is a situation that we can find in many regions of the world, for instance, in northern Italy, in the Veneto, and where there are many of these regions. So he thought, how could he do something to give more possibilities to participate to these children, to their education? And also, how can he strengthen the language of Wales? And so he coined the term that you can see here and that I cannot pronounce because it's in the language of Wales, but it was the origin of the notion of translanguaging. And he introduced an open discourse practice. And knew was that this was controllable by teacher and student. So the students could choose and they could say, well, we want to do this in this language or in another, and so on. And they could use all the language resources. And he published about this, and Then we had a lot of people who enjoyed this idea. For instance, Vivian Cook, Lee Wei from London, and Ophelia Garcia from the CUNY in New York, who took this idea and elaborated this idea further. So one beginning of the translanguaging debate was in a region with the coexistence of a national language, English, and of a local language, language of Wales, and how to find a way to make possible to use every language. Who is translanguaging a good fit for? Is this for all teachers? Yes, but this is for new teachers. Teachers have a little bit to change the perspective. We cannot think anymore that we have to understand every discourse and that we have to understand everything and we are the expert for all the utterances in the classroom. So translanguaging means also to give power to the teacher, to the students, that they can talk and they maybe will talk what we as teachers cannot understand. Translanguaging in the classroom works well, so this is still the interview with Grosjean, when the children and the teachers share the same minority language. But in many other classrooms, students come from many different language backgrounds. How can translanguaging take place then? So, do teachers have to learn all the languages? No, they don't. Garcia answers, translanguaging pedagogy requires a different type of teacher, a co-learner. Classrooms are increasingly multilingual in the world. It is possible for teachers, it's impossible for teachers to know all the languages of students. But it is possible for teachers to build a classroom ecology where there are books and science and multiple languages, where collaborative groupings are constructed according to home language, so that students can deeply discuss the text in the dominant school language with all the language resources. The students are allowed to speak and write with whatever resources they have and not wait until they have the legitimate ones to develop a voice. Where all students' languages practices are included so as to work against the linguistic hierarchies that exist in schools. Where families with different languages practices are included. Any teacher, including a monolingual one, can take up translanguaging to enable their bilingual students to make deeper meaning and legitimize their home language practices. And for which students is translanguaging appropriate for? Well, you can see it already here. So every student can gain a profit. So the multilingual student can apply all the repertoire. And if we just really can find a monolingual student, what is very difficult because normally students now know already and have encountered 2 or 3 languages. But if there is really a monolingual student, she can see, she can interact with multilingualism and with an important feature of the world. Okay, so let's look at the advantages. We will also look at some critical voices at the end, so it's not only the pink side. Okay, but there are advantages, as Baker already 2001 pointed out. And he pointed out translanguaging may promote a deeper and fuller understanding of the subject matter, because if a subject is discussed and written and read in all languages, there are much more interconnections and the subject is understood much better. It may help the development of the weaker language. And I think this could be very important in the discourse of endangered language. And as a linguist, yes, we see every language as a richness, and there are some endangered languages in Mexico, and this would be very interesting to see how they could be get some support. Translanguaging may facilitate homeschooling links and cooperation because parents can work better with the children, and it may help the integration of fluent speakers with early learners. As you know from every English instruction, the fluent speakers and early learners, it's difficult to have a good discussion together because they are so differently in their language competencies. And it would be maybe more interesting to have a debate where sometimes you can use every language. I have here some empirics that I wanted to discuss with you. I made a study in 2000 and published it in 2016. I made it in 14 and 15 on multilingualism in classes. The question of the study was mostly immersive versus separate teaching for newcomers. And we applied a qualitative method. And so we had a small sample, 29 pupils and 23 teachers. And we worked with interviews and observation and tests. And what is relevant for our discourse now is that we asked them already, in this time what they think about multilingualism in the classes. So we asked the pupils and we asked the teachers what are the advantages and disadvantages to use many languages in class, or would you prefer to use only the medium of instruction? In this case, this would be German, obviously. Okay, so what did the teacher say? So the teacher of German said, so I got some quotes for you because this is maybe more so you can have an idea of your colleagues. The colleague of German said, I couldn't let them do it for the first topic. That was a description of a person. And so, of course, it wasn't the same, but we did it this way. One student could name the body parts in German. He got a worksheet in German. And then he said, that's the nose, that's the leg, black hair, blue pants, whatever. Oh, but this is not the description of a person that you have to learn in this setting. You know, this is very, very simplified to single words. The topic of the lesson should be text and how to write a specific text and how to make observation and so on. So this is a hard simplification. Okay, let's see what the mathematics teacher did. She said, so I started with 2 students who were in the class. I actually tried to teach them separately, tried to give them material to work on. And when I had time in addition to the other lessons, I would correct them and see where they could improve and so on. Unfortunately, I can no longer do this with 5 students. So this is also, I found that striking because she insisted to teach it German. She insisted because she didn't see another possibility. And she did the best what she could imagine. But she put these 2 pupils at the end of the classroom and they had to work alone to see what they could do or what they could not do. But they were coming to this new country. They wanted to interact with everybody. But these 2 students were just in the angle working alone. And maybe they got some correction. And 5 is not a very big number. But I can understand that she with 5 students didn't know what to do anymore. Imagine would have been possible if she would have said, please look, if you have a common a shared language and you can make your group and we will discuss everything together, would have been very different. Also, the teacher expressed a very bad feeling because they really wanted to teach these children and they really wanted to welcome them, but they didn't know what to do. And they were so forced on the use of this German language, which should be the language of instruction, that it was hard for them to get another idea and they were suffering this. Yeah, and the teachers were the first to say that they were not sure if if the students really learned something new, um, because they didn't know how to teach them. What did the students say? I have brought some quotes for you. So we have some very positive voices like this one. What do you think about multilingualism in the classroom? Oh, I think it is good. Why? Well, we can meet people from all over the world and talk together. I enjoy this very much. There is another quote of students. The students were between 10 and 17 years old, so they could already reflect a little bit. And we did the interviews in German. How important is it for you to speak your language at school? It's very important because I want to maintain my language. But there are also critical voices, and I think this is very important to understand translanguaging in a differentiated way. If we always speak Arabic, we won't speak correct German. And I found this interesting because the student is right. Time on task is so precious, and we really have to reflect how much time on task we should spend on German to guarantee the further career in the education system. And here, number 4, in the same line, would you like to speak your language more often at school? No. Why not? Nobody would understand us. Oh, yes, he's right. Because if there is only one or if there are only 2 speakers of a language at school, translanguaging is hard to make sense. It can make some sense for research. It can make some sense for cooperating with parents, but it does not make any sense to say, oh, you're coming from this country, say a word just in your language. This is not communicating, and this is not translanguaging in the way Garcia thinks it, because this is not meaningful communication. Number 5 on the lines, I would say the time on task hypothesis. We have to learn German. We already know Kurdish. So there is a group of students who wants to speak the language at home and is sure of this. They won't lose the language. So school is a very precious place to learn the new language. And there is number 6, as I think mostly near to the practice of English as foreign language. And here on the lines that it has to do with the purpose and with the situation, if multilingualism brings something new or not. For instance, sometimes we could, if they would, so he begins saying, if we would always speak our languages, we would not learn German. This is right. But if sometimes if we do not understand, someone asks, and then the teacher says, no, only German. And this is not good because they do not understand. And this is the situation where it would be more appropriate to allow many languages to guarantee mutual understanding and then to return back to a German discourse, for instance. So here in this case, the student would enjoy to have some Arabic, for instance, mostly in the case of explanations. Yeah. And so how much multilingualism do students require in class? And I think we can see here very differentiated views. That there is not the yes and not the no, but there are different situations. There is a very important common goal, and this is learning the medium of instruction. For instance, learning English in the EFL class. Not all students have the same opinions. We know this as teachers. But what is often mentioned is that there would be freedom of choice appreciated. so that students can choose which language they want to use in this moment, and that they are free to use all languages. What I want to come now, and what I think gives a lot of possibilities, is to reflect language use for specific purposes. So very often in the language debate at school, we are speaking about language for everything. But we have very different modes to use languages. For instance, when we write, we are writing notes or we are writing texts. This is not the same. So in the notes, we could write just how we want, and we are making notes because we want to write quickly and we want to be free to make errors and to write just as we want. Discussion versus presentation. Also in the oral use, we have very different registers where we are using languages. And maybe in a presentation, we would not appreciate language changes every second word. But in a discussion, maybe, this gives the possibility to express a new idea. And so on, explanations, questions, as the student of Arabic pointed out, if you really do not understand what's going on, it's beautiful if you can change the language and understand what you have to do. Yes, students are anyway thinking in many languages. So they are doing math, for instance, in Spanish, but notes they are doing in German. And so kind of cognitive reality is present. Yeah, so that's about translanguaging. And coming to the conclusion of my talk, I wanted to come to some practices. So how could this be? And there is a good research field on practices on translanguaging. For instance, from Zubkowia, he's from a university in Poland. And he looked at English as foreign language in the Polish classroom. So you have a monolingual Polish-speaking class, and they have to learn English. Maybe this is not so very far from your situations. Please let me know. He tried, how would it be if he would open the space? Because what he observed, and this is also what we observed in our studies, the teachers very often declare to give priority to the exclusive use of one language in the classroom. Here, only English is spoken. So if you're really sitting in the classroom, you can see that this is not empirically really true, because students are speaking other languages, and sometimes also the teachers, which is, for instance, if he is or she's in a hurry or wants to explain something dramatically and so on. What Zubkowia looked at was a pragmatic orientation towards the L1 deployment, in this case, the use of Polish. And he saw that the participation was much better, and that he had the idea that students understood the text much better if they could use all the languages. Also, Anderson looked at this in India, and Anderson looked at many Indian schools, many teaching situations of English as a foreign language in India. And his conclusion was that it was very used to use the L1, but not systematically, and the teachers were not very aware of it. But the goal was always to prioritize learner participation over language choice. And how could you do this? So if you would like to do this, what can you do? So one point is that students and teachers can choose languages freely. So teachers do this normally, but students very often are not allowed. Code switching, borrowing, translation would be special phases and would be allowed in special phases and special windows, not always. The informal communication would be part of the education. So there would be moments where the students can talk with one another in which languages they want in a structured way. So now 5 minutes, so on. Notes could be on many languages, and multilingual testing could be a possibility um, to introduce translanguaging. Also, multilingual drafting of texts. Crease and Blackledge have also tried to work it out. And they, for instance, observed already 2010 bilingual label quests. So the students used 2 and more languages for labels. They used repetition in many languages, translation, and what was interesting, simultaneous literacies. And what they arrived was that the students were more engaged and they could establish their identity positions and negotiate meanings. And this is another important field, for instance, also for English as a foreign language, to think about what does this mean in one language, what in another, and what are differences in meanings. As you all know, this is a central topic of foreign language learning, to understand and to accept that you have maybe 2 words for something that is approximately the same, but is not the same. And that you have to understand that also the meaning can differ. So this is very easy to understand if you have 2, 3 more languages to make a contrast. What comes from what is one approach to go there in a very playful way is to make a kind of design of a language biography. Here, for instance, you see this language girl, and the people are asked to paint colors for their languages. This is an idea of Neumann, also Krumm, and this is a very good way to get into a kind of creative talk about which languages mean something to you and why they do mean this. So this is not only for making this little picture, but it's more to take the picture, to get into an interaction, and to reflect what does mean learning biography, where the language is important for me. For instance, I have this quote from a little girl who said, Italian language is in my stomach because I love to eat lasagna so much. And so this is what people think about it. When I saw this the first time, I thought this is really an impossible instruction. It cannot work. But the strange thing is that it is an impossible instruction, but it works with children and it works with adults. And this is a beautiful first step into coming to talk about different languages and what languages can mean to a person. For grammar teaching, translanguaging is very interesting because you can discuss and you can make a contrastive approach as and introducing other languages. So probably or maybe you will already work contrastive with Spanish and English, but with Nahuatl or with another language, this would maybe be even more exciting because, for instance, you really should think about inflection and what does this mean, and you really could reflect on position or plural marking, and you would come to very basic grammar categories to think that all languages want to express mostly the same contents, but which means do they use? So the end is by studying, for instance, Nahuatl, what do you learn about Spanish and what do you learn about English? And you can learn a lot about English studying another third language and introducing it. A way to make a kind of project could be a project to look at. We have here the project's 100 languages in our town. So to make interview projects, photo projects, where students are looking for the languages in the surrounding. And it's always surprising to see the multilingualism that is in fact around the school. Normally, it's much more than expected. For writing, for understanding and writing, translanguaging practices can be used very well. And you can see here the translanguaging phases in colors and in black the monolingual phases. And what you can see here as I think very important for translanguaging in the school. Translanguaging means not that you can use always every language. Because as one student said, always speaking Kurdish at school, you would not learn German. And this is right. So translanguaging is about defining spaces. And defining spaces with translanguaging is fine and wherever a resource can be used, but also defining multilingual spaces, defining monolingual spaces where you have to act in a monolingual mode because society is as it is, and there are talks that you have to do in one language. And here you can see an example for understanding and writing. And there could be multilingual spaces for taking notes, for research, for reading, for comparing multilingual texts and media, for the discussion of the topic if you want, or the discussion you can make in all the group monolingually for a first draft. And then everything should pass into a monolingual version because the objective is that we will have multilinguals that can use the multilingual mode and that can also use the monolingual mode. Linguistic landscaping is another approach to make visible the multilingualism in the surrounding and to make photo projects or going out with students and looking for multilingualism in the streets to make photos and to discuss. And also this is here a way where normally you're seeing that there is much more multilingualism than everyone expected before. Okay, I said already that there is a change in the perspective of teachers, and teachers are more learning, listening, and helping. But I think that this is a field where you are already experts because this is part of the English teaching. And yes, to come to the summary, translanguaging means to have monolingual spaces and to have multilingual spaces. It means an equal language management. So students can ask to speak many languages in this moment, but this not necessarily has to be allowed in this moment. And the deployment of the L1, for instance, in English, could be there for specific purposes, not always. As Anderson points out, this means at the end to go away from a monolingual target language idea and from monolingual target language practices and to come more for learner inclusion in classroom discourse and activities with a maximal target language use. Yeah. So here I'm at the end. Thank you for listening. And I'm now very curious to hear from you. What is the translanguaging's potential in Mexico? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Montanari. This was an extremely interesting presentation and helped us get a better understanding of this whole concept of translanguaging. And I know that at this point, you would like to have the participation of our participants, of your audience, and some comments, especially in these areas, what might be the potential for translanguaging here in Mexico with reference to the use of of some of the indigenous languages, migration, and double migration for children, which I think that our situation is slightly different from Europe in that most of the migration that happens in Mexico is coming from other countries where Spanish is the language. So we don't find the situation with so many different languages in the classroom. I'm not saying always, but it seems to be, and my colleagues can confirm that or change it if they have different experiences. My experiences here in the center of the country have been that the majority of immigrants are transitory. They are only going through. Consequently, we don't have them registered in formal schooling in public schools, for example. And this also changes the dynamic of the relationship between the migrant population and others, although I know this is quite different in the north and in probably the western part of the country. So I will reserve my comments and allow people to raise their hand or in the chat if you would like to mention that you have something to say. Please feel free to ask Dr. Montanari at this time. I'm not seeing anyone's hand up. I'm trying to get a grasp of more people here. Yes.
Yeah, but there is, I would like to ask a question, but there is someone who wrote a question in the chat first.
I have no questions in the chat. Dr. Mari Estrada, please go ahead.
Well, I'm so pleased to see you again, Elke. Very, very, very nice and very interesting what you have shared with us. And I'm very happy. I'm really happy to see you again. I don't know whether you can hear me well. Yes, you can hear me. Okay, thank you very much. Well, I'm going to read the question that we have in the chat, and then I will go over it because it's part of my question. It reads, good morning, I have a question. I would like to know to what extent should translanguaging be seen a sort of didactic approach or paradigm to teach languages?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think you're in the heart of the debate with this question, because seeing translanguaging only as a didactic approach would be too short, because you know, to allow the students to have their 5 minutes to speak their many languages, we did this already before. And we can do this, or we can have you know, a poster with many languages at the entrance of the school. Bienvenidas, ciao, etc. So we did this already before, but what we think is the new idea that translanguaging seeks to find a way out of the debate. Should we speak one language or should we speak another language, and to open the head to say, well, anyway, you are thinking with all languages, so maybe we could try to have spaces where you can use all languages. So I think it has more a cognitive dimension, and also it has this dimension of participation, of giving the right to participation. So to say, for having access to education, it is not necessary yet that you speak the language of education perfectly. So as we all know, the Children's Rights Convention and so on, every child has the right to get education, and so we cannot make language competencies here a way to hinder the right of access to education. So this goes very far to access participation ideas. And this is the social justice component.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And well, obviously, Ofelia Garcia has mentioned that establishing the target language as the only idiom or the exclusive use of a language, as you perfectly mentioned here, that in Mexico we have many institutions that promote English as the only speaking language when you are in that learning context. However, Ofelia Garcia mentions that it's kind of neglecting part of our linguistic profile, that is part of our language skills, and we are not profiting from those language skills. So somehow we are creating or promoting a handicapped speaker because they have to think in English. No, they have to speak only English. So, and they cannot use the language skills that they have acquired before. So, what do you think about considering translanguaging also as a communicative strategy and promote it, a positive communicative strategy, and promoting that with our beginner students, with our low intermediate students? For example, I really love the idea of linguistic landscaping in order to raise awareness that there is not only one language, we are not monolingual as such. So in order to increase participation, in order to help them to negotiate meaning, most of it in the early stages of learning or the target language.
Yes. Well, I think one point that is carefully to have to be looked at is that in the English instruction, we definitely need a long time where we are speaking English only. And this is the kind of, I think we should not lose this in the debate of opening the language paradigm. We all know that we once had foreign language teaching that was completely in the first language, and it was explained how you would say a sentence in English if you were allowed. And this was explained in Spanish or in German. So there was 95% of Spanish in the English foreign language course. And it took a long way to establish that you have, and really a pragmatic change meant to establish that for learning a language, you have to practice it. And this is, I think, looking at the English foreign language instruction classroom, this is one very strong argument to say we need this time to speak English. So it comes together with the kind of mental attitude, which is the monolingual attitude. So you should have half Spanish, half English, which is, we know all this is completely nonsense. But looking for the time that you have to speak English, this was really a revolution to use the foreign language instruction to use the language. And we should not go back to the idea to say we will use the L1 and think that we will get out of school with the language competency in a language that we did not use. So we should really careful think make a language management for instance, in discussions, for instance, in participation, to say, okay, you're allowed to say your idea, whatever you want, and then we will all reformulate this in English, or I will help you how this could be expressed in very basic English or in complicated English and higher levels and so on. But I think we should be really, we should have in mind that this was a victory for foreign language teaching, to use the language.
Yeah. Obviously, the priority is or has to be given to the target language, right? And finally, what do you think the research, the current research moves forward to creating more didactic resources or to creating more didactic activities that involves this awareness of translanguaging?
What are now currently going on are comparative studies and looking, I think, at one core question. That is the question: is time on task more fruitful? And if you will have all the 60 minutes or what you have and try to focus on English or whatever is the language of instruction, at the end, will you have more success than a translanguaging approach? Or will you have more success with using all the repertoire and will students understand better, and on the longer term, will they learn better? So I think this is a very interesting point, and there is a lot of fruitful research that we could do.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Nice to have you.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat, and then I will go to Gloria Ronson and give you a chance, but I will read the one that we have first of all in the chat. That is, thank you for sharing with us. I would like to ask another question. How important is it to update language teachers in translanguaging teaching practices?
Well, I think this is important because teachers should decide if they like this approach or they don't, or if they share the ideas or they don't share. And I think they should be completely free to have their ideas about this. But this is an international debate, so I would invite everyone to participate in this debate and to get a position.
Thank you very much. Gloria, would you like to ask your question?
Well, it's not really a question, it's more like a comment. And I just want to say that translanguaging is more common than we think in Mexico, because now I'm involved in a project in the south of Mexico where Maya is at the mix with English and Spanish. And it's related.
I've lost you. I think you're frozen. I don't know if you're frozen for everybody. But perhaps, Gloria, if you could write your comment in the chat, then I could read it, because we have lost you. I'd like to read the other comment then from another member of the audience, from Juan Pina. As a Chinese teacher, I must say this is quite interesting. Sometimes it is hard to make my students speak Chinese, but with this talk and ideas, I might change my approach. Thank you very much. And we have many thank yous in the chat also. I'll be waiting for Gloria. You're back.
Sorry, I lost connection. My Wi-Fi. So we are transcribing now some interviews in classroom observations.
Could you write your comment in the chat so that I could see it, please? Because we have difficulty. I think it must be your Wi-Fi, or I think it's yours, but we're not able to hear you any longer. And it sounds like a very interesting project, which combines Maya with Spanish and with English instruction. And this is specifically what Dr. Montanari is interested in hearing about, what is happening in Mexico along these lines of translanguaging.
So maybe I can use the time that we now have until she's writing
Sorry
to
for
invite
that.
you to Hildesheim. Okay.
I want to take more time. That was all, and thank you for your presentation and bring in this conference that brings this topic of translanguaging, that we should be a lot more aware of that, and help us to get rid of this monolingual bias in the language classroom.
Thank you so much. I think that one thing that has been emphasized is the importance of the teacher and the teacher's openness and willingness to allow things to happen in the class that are not totally controlled by the teacher, either the language that is being used or the students' movements or actions, but rather, and because what we're looking at in this conference is in educating and training new teachers, I think this is a very important aspect for all of us to take into account. The teacher's role in constructing the atmosphere, the environment that the classroom is going to have is key. It depends so much on the teacher. Elke, if you'd like to make some final comments. And we have one more question before you make your final comments. From Dr. Marta Lingling, I was wondering how emotions and the affective domain play a role in translanguaging.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. They play an enormous role. So if you have, this is what kind of Black and Crease 2010, what I tried to work out, that if you allow students to use all their languages, they more easily express all their identity and give their opinions. So they can say if they feel represented in the textbook, for instance, or if you're discussing a topic, they are more free to express all their emotions, their ideas, and this creates a much more direct approach in the classroom. So this is, and this is also a very good research topic. So yeah, you could reflect on it. I would like to read it. This is very beautiful because it has also something to do with feeling allowed to speak and feeling there that you can say what you want to say. So this is also very important for these young people looking at their self-confidence. This is the core approach. Yeah, and I'm happy to hear that there are also projects on this in Mexico. So sorry that for technical problems we could not listen to this in detail. I would like to use the last minute to invite you. There is 2 more questions. Okay, but anyway, I will say my invitation now for the next year. The next year is the last year of the Translang project. And we still have some funds to invite some of your colleagues, and you're very welcome that we can discuss our ideas in Germany.
Thank you
So
very
let's
much.
go to the
The last questions are, I would like to know how code switching and code meshing could facilitate communication in the classroom, according to you. And also, if you could share some highly recommended references, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. And the code switching and openness to code meshing, everything, mixing, how you want to call it. This is in certain periods, you know, you remember the idea of the windows, a very good way to be free to say everything and to go to a translanguaging idea. And what you can see very often, and this is also what we saw in the research, that very often code switching comes together with repetition and translation. So kind of, well, I saw here a book, you know, these phenomena you can see there. So it's just kind of facilitation of the discourse and in the combination. This is very interesting. And second question, so sorry, it slipped down. And highly recommended references. Well, what we saw in the multilingual classes in Germany was that the students, if they were allowed, used all the internet possibilities to make their research in different languages. So if you have an argument, whatever it is, you know, colonialism or tobacco industry or English literature, you can find this very easily on your smartphone, and you can look in every language to get a first idea to get there. And I think this is very interesting because students get there a lot of agency, and they know these techniques very well. And this could be a multilingual approach to enter in an English debate, for instance, about English literature or whatever the topic is.
Okay, thank you very much. There are many thank yous and congratulatory remarks in the chat, and I would just like to reiterate that we are extremely happy to have had you today. I think we have one more question. Is there any perspective concerning identity in translanguaging? Since it's one great repertoire without named languages, students' identity is constructed towards a constant shifting, or is this perspective still on the monolingual bias?
This is a very beautiful thought. And well, to be there very radically, we should say that most identity research goes to the idea that identity is a construct, and a very complicated construct with a lot of pieces. And also language knowledge is maybe a kind of such a complicated construct of a lot of pieces of, you know, phonological knowledge, of hearing perception, of semantic concepts that are vague and changing. And so the consequence would be that named languages are a construct of linguists, and that maybe named languages do not exist in the cognitive world. They are very useful to say, well, I will go to a country and what do I have to learn to buy a bread at the station or something like this. We all know that, and we are working on it. So they have some utility, but do they really have a cognitive reality? This is the question behind it. And this is also very interesting to make research from psycholinguistic points of view, because we don't have any proof that there is a kind of psycholinguistic reality of a named language. So there is not another area acting when you're speaking one language and when you're speaking another language. It's just phonology or it's just semantics. And so maybe the idea of a great repertoire is more near to this, what we are finding in psycholinguistic experiments. And it's more the effort to construct named languages. So when you're looking at research, there is a lot of discussion and a lot of research that you have as a multilingual speaker, you have to choose the right language and you have to suppress the wrong language, so the language you do not want to speak in this moment. There you have always the activity of the whole system. So the idea of named languages or the idea of speaking only one language is very often framed more as a complicated process of choice that you're doing in real time when you're talking.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. And the last comment is danke. And a thank you to you. So thank you very much. And I would like to thank everyone who has been with us in this initial presentation in our first plenary today with Professor Dr. Elke Montanari from Hildesheim University in Germany. Thank you for spending your afternoon with us in this early morning here in Mexico.
Thank you so much. I wish you a wonderful conference. It was a great pleasure to discuss with you. Seeing you soon. Goodbye.
Thank you so much. We'll be seeing you soon. This is the end of this presentation, and there will be a 15-minute break. The next group of talks will be starting at 10:15. At 10:30, excuse me, at 10:30.
Recording stopped.
On the different on the program, you have the links for the Zoom rooms where these different talks will be held. Thank you very much to the organizers, and thank you to everyone who was with us this morning. It was a great pleasure to be able to present Dr. Montanari and be with you here also.